Well, it's Christmas time, one of my favorite times of the year, and today we're at the Christmas tree farm to cut down one of these beautiful trees and to bring them into our home for the holidays. And many of you are probably wondering, where do all these sayings and symbols come from? What do they mean? What are their origins? Well, for some of you out there, you might already know, or maybe you've seen the video I did with Jordan Maxwell called Christmas with Jordan Maxwell, or maybe you've heard the Manly P. Hall lecture before called the Solar Christmas. He has another one on the winter solstice. Well, I'm going to talk about all of this today with you and more. But first of all, I'm going to say that this is a very sensitive topic for many religious people. And in order for us to really delve into this topic, I'm going to ask you to put aside any sort of religious bias you have for just a moment. And I'm talking about all of you Christian folks out there. First of all, there are many Christian scholars who will look at the idea of Jesus being born on December 25th, and they will say that never happened. And the reason is they will look at the idea of, in the Bible, it says that Jesus was born 6 months from when John the Baptist was born. And many of these scholars will say, okay, that brings his birthday to around the end of September. And then there will be others out there, such as Paul Tice, who have pointed out that in the Bible, it says that the shepherds were minding their flocks of sheep. And of course, at this time of the year, there would be no sheep out in the fields, which would date that time to around April. So there are several different opinions of when this could be, but most will agree that there is no way with those particular clues that it would bring us to around December 25th. So where does that come from? Well, there have traditionally been two types of Christians. There's a much older brand of Christianity when we go back into the Gnostics, and Gnostic comes from gnosis, which means knowing, and these are the heretics and those that follow the teachings of the Nag Hammadi, such as we see with Coptic Christians. And so these are much different Christians than the brand of Christianity that we started to see around the time of Constantine in Rome, when we see this new brand of Christendom, where they were absorbing a lot of pagan traditions, including all of the gods and goddesses, which were made into Catholic saints. They also celebrated Saturnalia, or the celebration of Saturn, from December 17th to the 23rd. And most recently, we were over at the Vatican at St. Peter's Basilica. And as you look up, you'll see that there clearly is the symbolism of the sun, or the sun god. And the reason for that is that one of the sun god traditions was very popular in Rome at the time, which was competing with Saturn, or Saturday worship on the day of Saturn, Saturday of course, and that was Mithraism. The god Mithra, which is a sun god that was worshipped on the day of the sun. And this comes from the Persian Zoroastrian traditions. Now, all of these traditions that we see surrounding the sun god, which is very much connected to the winter solstice traditions, surround the idea of the sun dying for 3 days and being resurrected. And this is no exception. We see in the other traditions with Odin, in the Yule Norse tradition, with Odin, Freya, Balder, and Thor, Balder being the sun god. Then we see, of course, with the Phrygian traditions, and many of you have heard me talk about the Phrygians before with the Phrygian cap crown, and they had a god named Ion, which is, by the way, where we get John from. As you could take the I and the J from the Greek, and they're interchangeable. But with those traditions, the Phrygians had Attis. There was also Dionysus for the Greeks, or Bacchus, the Lord of the Vineyards, which, by the way, we see a lot of the exact same titles from Christianity used with these gods, such as the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, and the Lamb of God. Then we go over into the Indian traditions with Krishna, and the Egyptians, we had the various sun gods with Osiris, the original sun god that became the Lord of the Underworld, and then we go into Horus and Ra. And you will also notice that they had 12 helpers, which are the same as the 12 constellations. And this is where we get the 12 apostles from. This is also very similar to the Masonic allegories with Hiram Abiff, which we're going to talk about in just a moment on how that relates to the Christmas tree. But in these traditions, we see them laid out for us in the New Testament of the Bible, which is greatly allegorical, and it's all based on astrotheology. And what I'm talking about here is that we see a very important story being told. And this story is very similar to the Yugas, or the Great Year that Plato talks about, where we have the changing of ages and the precession of the equinoxes. But it's also the story of the sun, the light of the world, who was crucified with a crown of thorns, or the sun rays. In fact, the word sun, S-O-N, as in the Son of God in English, comes from the Germanic sun, for the sun in the sky, and that is S-O-N-N-E, which is the opposite meaning in the German, which, by the way, is very relevant here because English is Low German. Now, this is something Jordan Maxwell taught me, as he gets asked about these names constantly. The sun is closest to the earth in the northern hemisphere, and it's the hottest during the summer in the constellation of Leo. Leo, the Lion King, or the Lion of Judah. 90 days later, and 90 degrees, we're in the fall. And where we're at there is that we're in Scorpio. And Scorpio, we see the backbite of the scorpion, or the betrayal, which is shown with Jesus in the Bible, with the kiss of Judas that's kissing Jesus. And Jordan Maxwell has pointed this out, that in those times, you wouldn't need to kiss Jesus to show the soldiers who he was. He would have been very well known. And so this is a truly allegorical, symbolic gesture that we're seeing mentioned here, because a scorpion actually gives off two little kiss marks when he's biting. So this backbite of the scorpion is showing the change from Scorpio. Then we move into Virgo, the Virgin Mary, which is also symbolized by Bethlehem, the house of bread. We also learned this was announced by a star in the east, which was followed by 3 wise men. Well, we know this star was actually Sirius, and the 3 wise men are the stars that align around Orion to point to the sunrise in the east. Again, the sun stays at the same degree for 3 days, the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th, or dies and resurrects, springing back to life on the 25th. And these winter solstice celebrations and writings in the ancient teachings are found everywhere and are linked to the ancient imperial sun cults. When we were in Ireland recently, over at Newgrange, we were visiting this giant stone monument, and when you go inside, it's in the crux formation, the crux chamber, which means it's a cross chamber. And when you enter this thing, it is absolutely magnificent, because above the door, there's a little window that at this time of the year, during the winter solstice, light comes through that passageway and lights up that chamber, very specifically only in the morning. And this is absolutely amazing, since this was built in 3800 BCE, or 4th century BCE. That's 5,000 years ago. And we're told these are very primitive people, but they were still able to build this magnificent chamber. Now, we also know that the cross is a very ancient symbol. The cross goes back even into Dagon from the Babylonians. We know it was carried by Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, Zoltan. We also see that the most ancient cross was the Tau, but we also find it in the Proto-Hindu traditions, as well as the Egyptians had the Ankh. And when we look at the Celtic cross, we know that it has a circle in the middle, which is actually a shorthand abbreviation for this, the 4 cycles of the year, of the sun and the seasons, and the zodiacal principles here of astrotheology, which is absolutely incredible. And we don't stop here, because this goes back even into Otanism in Egypt with Akhenaten, as well as the Osirian traditions that we see carried forward. Now, why this is very important is that we also see this celebrated in other ways. Of course, at Christmas time, you see a lot of lights and candles. And this is the representation of the light returning, the light which meant so much to these ancient peoples. In fact, if you look at the name Horus, Horus is where you get the hours. Horus is in a day. Why the sun rises on the Horus has risen, horizon. And why Set, the evil bad guy, the darkness, is why the sun sets. And this is also why in Hanukkah, later we see an adaptation of this with the Festival of the Lights. But to understand the Christmas tree, we have to go back into the tradition of Osiris. Osiris in Egyptian mythology was killed brutally, chopped up into pieces. His phallus was removed. That's a rather Lorena Bobbitt sort of move. And when this happened, his blood trickled down into an area, and a sprig of an acacia or an evergreen started to grow there. And by the way, acacia is the Acacia confucius, the other constituent with Mimosa hostilis that you see in the ayahuasca brews for the shamanism practices with psychedelic ceremonies and initiations, and that also grows in the Sinai Peninsula. We again see this tradition over with the Phrygians, with Attis, with the sprig of an evergreen or the sprig of an acacia, and in the Masonic allegories, we see this with Hiram Abiff, the widow's son, who was accosted by the three ruffians, Jubilah, Jubilo, and Jubilum. And of course, he was buried at the brow of Mount Moriah, and a sprig of an acacia popped up. And this is again where the tradition of the Christmas tree comes from, the everlasting life coming back into this world, which is an incredible symbol. Lastly, many of you will also talk about at this time of the year, Santa Claus and his reindeer. Well, there's many myths that we get that incorporate themselves into this idea. And I think Santa Claus has really become a spiritual egregore, an intelligence of its own that connected to the spirit of Christmas that people connect with. And others have said, well, maybe it's an anagram for Satan and it's connected to Saturn. We can also draw a great parallel with the Norse legends of Odin, who travels across the sky at night in a chariot bearing gifts, and people would leave out offerings for him, much how kids leave Santa Claus cookies or treats. Or we see that there are connections to the Turkish and Greek mythologies and histories. And then we also read about the connection to the Amantia muscaria mushroom and Siberian shamans and the reindeer. But I think what's very interesting about Santa Claus is that he gets his colors from the red and the white over at Coca-Cola and the marketing attached to that. So whatever your belief in Santa Claus or that tradition, I believe that it has formed a spirit of its own intelligence, and reminds us greatly about this season and to be generous to one another and kind and forgiving, which also is taught in mysticism and the principles of the occult this time of the year, that the angels of Capricorn, much like we hear about with the story of the angel Gabriel that gave his message, are surrounding the earth at this time and helping humanity to heal, to forgive, to be generous. And again, angel just comes from the Greek for angelos, which means messenger. And so whether you look at this as the forming of these great offices or intelligences that are influencing the earth through electromagnetic energy shiftings, or just a time when we need to go within, that is very important. And that reminds me also about the writings of Rudolf Steiner. Rudolf Steiner said that this time of year, at the winter solstice, with the snow on the ground where it's colder, nature is retreating into itself, that it reminds us to go within ourselves and to examine the lessons that we've learned throughout the year and all that we've contemplated, and to heal and rejuvenate and refresh and become strengthened, energized for the coming year ahead as we enter into Aquarius. And Aquarius is mentioned in the Bible when the disciples ask Jesus, when will we attend the last Passover? And he says, meet me at the house with the man with the water pitcher. And when you look at the symbol for Aquarius, he is bringing the water of spring, which also shows us that we celebrate the resurrection or the springing back up of the sun, it returning to the northern hemisphere around the period of Easter. But of course, just to give you a rehash, the sun dies the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, and then moves back a degree on the 25th and has returned to the earth to bring us this warmth and strengthening. And this reminds us of how Osiris was resurrected from the dead after 3 days when his mother Isis had reattached his phallus, on how Mary Magdalene returned to the sepulture of the tomb to witness the resurrection after 3 days. And again, in the Bible, we also have the Christmas tree, by the way, with the Jesse trees. And this tradition is very ancient and very old. But I will also ask you all to look at this as a great allegory for not only the light of the world and the sun in the sky, but your light, the light within, so you can illuminate the path for yourself and others. So at this time of the year, I will ask you, yes, please be generous, please be kind, please be forgiving, and spend time with family. And it might be hard for you because you might not have family to hang around at this time of the year. Maybe you've lost someone special in your life, but they're always with you in your heart. And you can always express that love and kindness to others. And at this message at this time of the year, I want to tell you, from our families to yours, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Yule, Happy Winter Solstice, Happy New Year, and we'll see you all very soon.